Can anybody hear me? Because I can't hear anybody.
I can hear you.
I can hear you too, but I can't hear anybody else.
I believe everyone is muted.
I believe they haven't started the taping of it yet, or called it to order.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll, for those, we will get started. It is Friday afternoon. And I see several of our speakers on the line and in the room. So I am State Representative Maria Horn, the co-chair of the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee, and welcome to our public hearing. As a couple of reminders, I've been reminded that I haven't read the very popular safety announcement recently. So I will share with you. In the interest of safety, I would ask you to note the location of and access to the exits in this hearing room. 2 doors through which you entered the room are the emergency exits and are marked with exit signs. In the event of an emergency, please walk quickly to the nearest exit. After exiting the room, go to your right and proceed to the main stairs or follow the exit signs to one of the fire stairs. Please quickly exit the building and follow any instructions from Capitol Police. Do not delay and do not return unless you are advised that it is safe to do so. In the event of a lockdown announcement, please remain in the hearing room and stay away from the exit doors until an all clear announcement is heard. Very exciting, I feel like.
I can't hear anything.
What was that? So I will pass the gavel for introductory comments in just a moment, but I'll just remind of just our basic procedures for a committee. We limit each speaker to 3 minutes of testimony. The order of speakers is pretty much randomized, aside from allowing a few speakers to leadership speakers to testify early in the testimony. And when you hit or are near the 3-minute mark, you will hear from our clerk and administrator. If you are on Zoom, please be on the alert for an invitation to be promoted so that we can hear you speak. And if you are in the room, please make sure you've identified yourself with the clerk or the administrator so they know you're here, so that we can get you as quickly as possible in front of us testimony. With that, Mr. Co-Chair.
Just quick good afternoon, and looking forward to hearing the testimony today, and reminding everyone that it is Friday afternoon and UConn is playing at 6:30. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll have that the UConn game as a panelist on Zoom. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank everyone for being here physically and virtually today, and I look forward to a conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. That's what public hearings are for. With that, I will call our first speaker, Marianne Turner, who is with us on Zoom.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marianne Turner and I'm from Enfield. When I signed up to speak on Bill HB 5290, I checked the wrong box. I am here today to support the removal sunsetting of the highway tax bill. We all say we want to help business owners stay in business and in Connecticut, and we want to make Connecticut a better place to do business and grow. We want our residents to have good paying jobs and live and raise their children in our state. But for some reason, the majority legislature also wants living, working, and thriving in Connecticut to be difficult. It may be an unintended consequence. Today, you'll hear why this bill needs to be repealed. Costs to the truck businesses in and out of Connecticut have been encumbered with heavy, unnecessary burden, and this tax takes away from those businesses thriving, providing good paying jobs, and or expanding in the state. And making a buck is not a dirty word. The highway tax is pushed down to the end user for goods and services because in the end, the only revenue stream paying the proposed taxes is the person purchasing the goods, and that is you and me. Businesses don't have a way to make up new revenue streams like the legislature. Businesses must live within the framework of their business model. The market decides for them if they thrive or die. It is disingenuous for the majority of the legislature to claim on one hand that they want to ease the burden of Connecticut residents, but on the other, with a highway use tax, they want to burden the same group. The Special Transportation Fund was instated for just one reason, to focus on upgrading our roads and bridges, but the majority legislature diverted dollars for other departments such as motor vehicles or subsidies to buses or rail. Was that right? Did the road and bridge work get done, or is it getting done? Every legislative cycle, more bills are developed and more taxes are conjured up. Bottom line, the majority legislature is putting more pressure on the businesses, and that puts pressure on the end user, us. The state must find a way to get construction projects up and running to justify the revenues being pulled into the line item. The majority legislature needs to find a balance and stop taking the easy way out, which is taxes, fees, and licenses. Remove the highway use tax. It's an overreach. We must not burden one group on the back of another. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, I thank you for joining us this morning. Excuse me. It is
Thank
not
you,
morning,
everyone.
very much
Bye-bye.
afternoon. Next, we have Representative Candelora.
Thank you, Madam Chair Horn, Chairman Fanfara, and Ranking Member Cheeseman. If I may, I have with me Dave Palumbo, who has also signed up to speak. You certainly can get a hold of me. I've submitted written testimony, so I don't think I need to speak much further on it, but I'd like to defer my time to Dave. We'll consolidate for the purposes of getting out of here for the UConn game.
Okay, we certainly know where to find the minority leader. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dave Palumbo. I am a business owner and transportation owner in North Branford, Connecticut. I just want to talk a little bit about where it stands and how does this impact us as a family-run business after 35 years going into a second generation. Not only the cost of the IRP tax for registrations, the IFTA, highway use tax now, the diesel cost to us, in 20 and 21, we were in the $2.50 to $3 range for fuel. In 22, it jumped to $3 all the way to $6.16 we were paying. Those were serious impacts on us. We had to pass that cost on to everybody. We had to pass the cost on to the consumer at the end of the day. This tax is going to do the same thing if it stays in effect for the duration. Everybody in this room, every consumer is going to pay for this. We, as a business owner, we're not even sure how we're going to audit ourselves to be able to monitor this. We've heard that you want the driver to be able to monitor it, which is we're going backwards in times. So we have to rely on our GPS. But this tax is going to put such a burden on us. It's going to cost my company alone, as I said on Wednesday at a press conference, between $150,000 to $170,000. I'm asking for all Republicans and Democrats to come together to find a way to repeal this, to put it on hold, get our hands wrapped around this. I can't afford this as a family owner, in a business trying to turn this business over to my kids. You know, we only have 4 states. We're the 5th state now to do this. As you've heard before, 21 other states repealed this. I'm not quite sure how you're going to monitor this. I'm not quite sure how you're going to be able to audit this, you know. And the biggest problem that I have really with this is that it's discriminatory because, you know, class 8 trucks to class 13 trucks are the only trucks that are going to be taxed. Class 7 trucks and down are not going to be. So if that's not discriminatory, I don't know what is. You know, I don't know how anybody thinks that, and quite
30
frankly, I don't want to
seconds.
see it on any truck. Quite frankly, I'm in the transportation business. I don't think it's fair across the board. But how is it fair just for us as a combination tractor trailer, class 8 and above is the only one that's going to be able to carry this tax as well as others? Or if you're a class 13, you know, I don't know how people think that a class 7 truck down is not going to do any damage to the roads with the footprint of a triaxle dump truck or an oil truck or a garbage truck. How is this not going to affect the roadways?
I was going to give you an opportunity to summarize. That was the final 3-minute bell. If you have a quick summary, please finish. And I'm sure there will be questions for you, sir. So you have an opportunity.
I
to
appreciate
say
it. Thank you. You know, in closing, I'm just very, very concerned for my 35-year-old business, 2nd generation business. How are my kids going to afford this? How are we going to afford this? And at the end of the day, everybody in Connecticut is going to pay this. When you go to the store to buy a loaf of bread or your tea or your coffee or your eggs or the gas that you put in your cars and vehicles, it's not right. It's just everybody's going to pay for it. And I'd like to continue, as I said, Wednesday, to continue to grow my business. We have, you know, a very good clientele of business, and we'd like to continue to move forward in the state of Connecticut and hope that Republicans and Democrats could come together for the benefit of business owners in the transportation field.
Thank you. I'm certain there are questions. I had one initial question, which is that your note about the distinction between various classes of trucks. Is there a weight differential between class 1 through 7 and classes 8 and above?
Yes, yeah, there's differentials from, you know, class 8 to class 13 and class 7 down from, you know, 26,000 to 33,000 to, you know, we particularly register our tractor trailer combination at 80,000. So, you know, we can carry 50,000 pounds. The truck and trailer combination's 80,000. So in the truck itself, 50,000 worth of cargo. So
I just, there is some rationale behind, I mean, line drawing is always difficult for a legislature, and there is never any good place to draw a line, but in terms of that there is a weight differential as you move up the classes generally. To your point, there's not zero damage from those 7 and below.
no, but a class 7 truck will carry 76,500 pounds.
Yeah.
You know, we're at 79,000. So
Again, line drawing is, we draw the lines all the time and they are never perfect.
Yeah.
I hear you on that.
Yeah.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And thank you for coming here today. A question, I know you touched on this on Wednesday in terms of not just the added cost of the highway use tax, but the additional administrative work. And I believe you mentioned you had to take on an employee simply to administer that. So I wonder if you could expand on that a bit.
So, you know, we did have to hire an additional employee just to monitor and audit and calculate this. And the cost of that employee is $85,000 to my company. That's without the tax. You know, we had to hire he's not the individual's not an accountant, but he has an accounting background. And, you know, this is not an easy task to calculate every day of every week and monitor it. So, yeah.
So how many trucks is he having to monitor in terms of just the sheer number of trucks and the amount of data he has to collect on a daily basis?
So total trucks and trailers, we have about 100 pieces of equipment on the road. So, you know, I'm sorry, what was the other part?
That was, you know, how many How many truckloads is he having to keep track of every single day?
Yeah, so we do anywhere from 80 to 100 truckloads a day on an average.
So a significant number.
Correct,
every-
yes.
And my other question, I know one of the issues, particularly with regard to DRS, has been the need to report monthly, simply because it's a very involved process. Can you comment on that?
So, we are still trying to, we've already filed, we obviously have done our January, we're going to be doing our February payment. It is very difficult. It's difficult to have to collect all the data every day from the GPS, from every load every day. So, if you take 80 or 90 or 100 loads a day, it's 350, 400, 500 loads a week. Times that by the 4 or 5 weeks in a month, and it's an absorbent amount of time. Basically, this individual works on it throughout a significant 8-hour day, and will we get better at it? I don't know. Will we learn to deal with it and figure out shortcuts? I'm sure we probably will, but right now I had to hire an individual to
And
to do
that's
this.
someone you're having to hire as opposed to hiring another driver to bring
Correct.
more business in. This
Yeah,
is- This is
I
a
mean-
net loss to the business. And if I may, I have a question for Representative Candelora. I know we saw in the report from DRS that 80% of this is being assessed against out-of-state trucking. And does that assuage your concerns?
I think what we have to look at is really what the impact of this tax is having, even if it's 90% of out-of-state trucks, those trucks constitute inputs, into Connecticut. So for instance, just for my business, we're in the manufacturing industry. We get our raw material from Pennsylvania. Our transportation costs for our raw materials already at 20%. Just crossing the bridge in New York, it's $100. It's very difficult to get product into Connecticut because it is so costly to transport. So that's going to be another bottom line increase for our input that we're receiving. And I think you'll hear from other people that may say the same thing. But also, I think we have to look at the concentration of this tax. For Connecticut, it's roughly 1,200 businesses in Connecticut that have filed and are paying. If you extrapolate that, it's a $9 million tax annually on 1,200 businesses in Connecticut. It's pretty, it's significant, especially when it's not necessarily divided up equally among them. So some, I think, in the situation of Palumbo Trucking, they are really disproportionately impacted by this tax. And I think all of the burden is being put on a very few for our transportation needs. And I think we need to evaluate that.
Thank you. And I welcome your comments. And I think as we look at this as well, I think, everyone is aware not only of our budget surplus, but I think we're looking at an additional 1.6 billion in federal infrastructure money that's just coming to Connecticut as of right.
Correct.
And that we haven't the ability to access up to $100 billion in competitive grants that will be used for the kind of projects that theoretically this highway use tax may support. So, all right, I want to thank you for your questions. I'm sure I'm coming up against my 5 minutes, and thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Susan. Representative Zupkus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming today. This is, it's disheartening on your business, but on our consumers, because not everybody can absorb those costs, and it comes down to us, like the
Right.
residents of Connecticut. And Representative Candelora, you mentioned about you submitted written testimony. There's over 200 written testimonies, and we don't have that many people testifying, but that just tells me what the concerns are. There's a lot of concerns out there, and people have to work. Everybody can't come up on a Friday afternoon, which I'm sure you're grateful for, Senator, so we can see UConn. But one question I have for you, Representative, is that I hear people that are for this tax saying, well, how are we going to pay for the roads and bridges? And so could you just help explain this, please?
Yeah, I just, I share everybody's concerns with the Special Transportation Fund. It's certainly something we've been trying to get our arms around for a decade. And I think when we look at the guardrails, the caps that were put in place, which has guided our general budgeting process, the special transportation fund has really been neglected. And, you know, right now we heavily subsidize public transportation in Connecticut. But as we continue to add rail lines like Wallingford to Springfield, it is an added operational cost, you know, on our fund. And we're not really evaluating getting those costs under control. So of course, the transportation fund is the one area that you know, keeps going into insolvency. I do think we need a broader conversation about it. I think we should be looking at a transit authority to evaluate what the benefits are in transportation. With all the technology that we have now with Uber and Lyft, you know, should we be changing up our structure from, you know, busing to something that might be more economic for the state to be implementing, as opposed to just taxing and walking away. And it's almost like that fund sort of straddles the middle between our transportation committee and our finance committee. At some point, we just have to take ownership of it. And I'm concerned about this tax because when it was passed 2 years ago, it was under COVID. We were in silos. It was a different universe, but the world was very different back then. We had lower gas prices. We didn't have a war in Ukraine. We didn't have supply chain costs. We're barely getting out of the disruption that we saw through COVID. And to add this in has been I think, pretty devastating for some businesses. I know for ours, we're struggling right now with China. They've become much more aggressive. And France, we're seeing in our industry, they are getting their product into the US cheaper than what we could manufacture in North Branford, Connecticut. And so the transportation costs, you know, are a challenge. And just one last piece of, I think, what's different now, you know, each year we have our transmission permitting fees that the industries are hit with. Something that's unique to our construction industry are our contracts are bid out a year in advance. So a lot of these companies that we have already had set prices. And so, for instance, the transmission fees last July went up $7 per permit. It costed one company $30,000 that they couldn't recoup because they had already contracted out that. The increase in the fuel, same thing, was $158,000 increase to one project just because of the fuel cost increases. In previous years, we've actually, and I remember Representative Widless and Senator Kennedy had adjusted and for those increases to say they don't apply to contracts that have already been entered into. And so I think that we have to look at those type of things because these industries are locked in. A lot of them are paying a bill. I think when I first got the phone call from Mr. Palumbo, it was probably about 2 months ago. I mean, it was not something that he was even aware of,
Right.
that didn't have the time to react to this.
Thank you. I would hate to think that this piece of legislation that affects $1,209 million is going to put people out of business or leave our state.
Well, and to your point, you know, we're going to lose commerce if this stays in effect. And we have, and I won't go on, but, you know, there's a company here today, Blakesley Pre-Stress, with us. And two things happen. I have tractor trailers and I haul into their facility. He has other carriers that come in with triaxles, class 7 and down. How am I going to stay competitive to continue to do work for companies like that? And he's only one company that I do business for. How can he say, Dave, just because you're good looking, I'm going to keep you? That's not going to happen. He's going to say, if you can't match the prices my triaxle guys are hauling for, I got to let you go. You know, and I've been with some of these companies since I started 35 years. So, and as you said before, you know, there's the economy's fragile. And with this impact is going to come to the impact of your family and everybody else. There's people struggling to put food on their table, clothes on their kids' back, and gas in the car in the same week. How is this going to help?
Absolutely. And I'm sure I'm at my 5 minutes, but the last comment I'll say is I have a company in my district that's probably the biggest company around and employs thousands and thousands of people. They're being courted every single day to leave.
Yeah.
That's people that are going to lose their jobs, and they're a huge trucking company and they truck groceries.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I had one follow-up question that I wanted to ask Mr. Palumbo. So when we passed this legislation, I had a lot of conversations at the time. I represent a very rural district with the dairy industry. And particularly what I heard from a lot of the, the people who transport, the dairy truckers, that in fact, they travel more miles than they would ordinarily because of the poor quality of infrastructure. Like there are certain areas, certain bridges, certain roads they can't use because of the poor quality of that infrastructure. And so they're adding extra miles because they have to travel around. I wonder whether you have experience at all with sort of, the poor quality of Connecticut's infrastructure adding mileage that you might not otherwise have to travel.
It's a good question. And yes, there are some routes and some corridors that we have to not use or go around because of bridge conceptions, bridge weights, and things like that. So yes, we are going out of route to some degree. Maybe not as much as others, but yes, it is, we do, and it does add mileage to our vehicles every day. So.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, again, thank you for being with us and sharing your experience with your business today.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everybody, for your time and bringing this out. And I'm hoping that both sides can come to an agreement for the betterment of Connecticut and the transportation field in Connecticut. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, we have Herbert Holden, who I believe is in the room, followed by Marcella Karowski and Stephen Hudspeth. Mr. Holden, welcome. Thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Finance Committee. My name is Herbert Holden, and I am the Vice President of Herb Holden Trucking of East Windsor, Connecticut. I'm a second-generation family business owner, and we have been in continuous operation since 1961. We operate 18 commercial vehicles throughout New England. Our fleet is comprised of 10 dump trucks and 8 tractor trailers. We move aggregate materials and construction equipment on lowboys and flatbeds to construction projects throughout Connecticut and New England. I am grateful for the opportunity to submit testimony to support of HB 5290 because it would relieve a costly and burdensome new tax. This tax will have an impact on my bottom line at a time when increasing costs such as fuel and labor are making it very difficult for me to operate my business. In the month of January, which is our slowest month of the year for our industry, my business incurred a $4,057 highway use tax fee. As we get busier, this number will climb to $7,000 a month based on last year's mileages. So it's fair to estimate that my small business will have an annual obligation of over $70,000 to the state highway use tax fund. That's equivalent to one truck driver's annual salary. How does the state expect a small business to grow with that kind of exorbitant and grossly biased tax? That isn't to say that trucks don't cause some level of damage to the road, and the state has been actively charging trucking companies for years through the annual registrations, overweight permits, and the diesel tax to make up for those differences. Is this committee aware of the cost to register a dump truck or a tractor trailer in the state of Connecticut? It costs us approximately $2,000 per vehicle to register annually through our IRP. Compare that to the biannual cost to register a pickup truck or a van or SUV, which is less than $300. On top of the registration fee, we purchase oversized overweight permits. That's an additional $700 to $1,200 per vehicle, depending on weight ratings. This year, to register my 18 trucks, it will cost approximately $36,000 for annual registrations. And additionally, I expect to spend $14,000 to purchase overweight oversized permits. So in total, this is approximately $50,000 just to operate a fleet of 18 trucks in the state of Connecticut. Where does that money go? If I was a courier business that had a fleet of 18 Sprinter vans, I wouldn't spend more than $5,500 on registrations. Yet here I am paying 10 times that price just to do business in the state. My company will purchase 220,000 gallons of fuel annually at 45 cents a gallon state tax rate. That's also another contribution of $99,000 to the state's transportation fund. On top of that, we have the 2290s that cost me $9,900, the unified carrier registration at $1,200. I buy 150 tires a year to support my fleet, which the state gets sales tax and federal excise tax at a tune of $11,000. Where does the money go? Herb Holden Trucking contributed $170,000 in total in registrations and taxes in 2022, operating 18 trucks. Can I summate?
Yes.
Okay,
ma-
sorry.
Yes, with alacrity.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I would just like to finish with, I asked this panel to think about how they expect a trucking company to survive with a tax that adds another $70,000 to its annual state obligations. I can't absorb it, so I have to pass it on to my customer. My largest customer happens to be the state of Connecticut. I recently worked on the I-84 project, and where we were hauling off 20,000 yards of clay from the highway project. That cost would have been $7.35 a load just in this highway use tax. That's adding another $10,000 just for that project. That's just my portion of a multi-million-dollar project, not including the concrete, the asphalt, and the other aggregate materials are hauled into the state. I stand in support of HB 5290. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Holden? Representative Cheeseman?
Thank you. And thank you for coming here today. And you mentioned obviously the amount you pay in fees and registrations and taxes to the state. I presume, so you're in Windsor?
East Windsor.
East Windsor. So I presume in the town of East Windsor, you're also contributing significantly to the local property tax base.
100%, yes. We also manufacture a lot of our own aggregate material. So we have hundreds of pieces of heavy construction equipment that's also taxed, but along with our 18 trucks, yes.
So the state and the local municipality are doing very well out of you at the moment.
I would think so.
Yeah. And this would be a significant increase to your bottom line.
It's a 40% increase in what we're currently giving to the state already.
I think a 40% tax increase sounds like a lot to me. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Marcella Karowski, and please, as always, correct my mispronunciations of your name.
That was spot on. Thank you so very much, Representative. Members of the committee, I am Marcella Karowski. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I support HB 5290 because tax relief directly affects each Connecticut citizen. Affordability must be a priority for individuals, couples, and families. Financial burdens often put undue stress on a population, which does in turn affect the health and well-being of minors. Life must be affordable so a parent can stay home with their children if they choose. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your very efficient testimony. Any
You're
questions?
welcome, Representative Horn.
Seeing none, again, thank you for being with us today on a Friday afternoon.
No problem at all. Thank you so very much.
Next up, we have Stephen Hudspeth, followed by Monty Dew, and then Representative Kenneth Gucker. Is Mr. Hudspeth, are you with us? Yes, you are. Please proceed.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm right here.
The floor is yours, sir.
May I go ahead? May I go ahead and make my remarks?
You may. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, ma'am. My purpose in responding here is that you may know in past years, there have been very strong protests against imposing tolls because of their impact on individual residents. This arrangement that's reflected in what we do in terms of charging trucks for their use of our roads seems to me to be highly valuable and highly important because it's a way of avoiding the tolls, but at the same time, not allowing trucks to get away with in Connecticut what they're not allowed to get away with in New York, Massachusetts, or other states that impose tolls on vehicles. It's important that truckers be required to pay for their use of the roads. And they pay for it, I know, in some ways, and I've heard a lot of comments here about how much costs affect them. But the reality is that their trucks cause a lot of damage to roads and also represent a burden on commerce. If we don't impose tolls as the state of Connecticut, we're losing money. this tax is one way of dealing with that, and I think is a very innovative way of dealing with it. If the incidence is unfair in the sense that certain types of vehicles, triaxles, are not included, well, there are ways you deal with that by amending it to be more inclusive. But I certainly wouldn't eliminate it. It's a very good revenue source, and I would think those legislators who have opposed tolls and who at the same time are critical of state funding because they say we impose too much on individuals, they ought to be strongly supporting a bill that enables this kind of a charge to be imposed on truckers and not take that opportunity away from the state to raise revenues in a very fair way.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Hudspeth? Seeing none, again, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, ma'am.
Next up, Monty Dew. Are you online? No? Kenneth Gucker is in the room with us.
Good afternoon, representatives of the Bonding and the Finance Committee. It's kind of unusual to be on this side of the table for a change, but I did write it down to try to keep it within 3 minutes. It took me a while to get it down because I know you have a long agenda. And I thank you very much for the hard work you do. I'm here to speak in strong opposition to HB 5290, an act eliminating the highway use tax. When I first entered the legislature in 2019, we were faced with mounting debt, bonding liabilities, and the elephant in the room was the condition of our crumbling infrastructure, mainly our roads and bridges. In order to tackle this problem, tolls were considered, but was met with much political opposition. At the end of the day, we had the bond then adding to our long-term debt. Over the next few years, the legislature worked in partnership with the governor's office to develop a responsible budget that has resulted in a positive fiscal position that we find ourselves enjoying today. HB 6688 was one of those policies that assisted in making sure that those who damaged our roads, many at rates of at or above 625 times the average passenger vehicle impact, contribute financially to the maintenance, road, and upkeep. Of the many concerns raised by the Connecticut residents, the conditions of our state roads were at the top of the list. During my 4 years in the legislature, one of the projects that I lobbied for was the repair of the most used and damaged state road highway in my district that also served the state's largest high school. So I understand the struggle and the need for safe roads. An argument has been made that if we institute responsible fee-based use tax, that will negatively impact working families by expenses being passed on to consumers. This fear tactic is simply not true. The amounts proposed to be collected are minimal in nature, but go a long way to dealing with repairing our roads and bridges. I will also add that the fees paid by the trucking companies are tax deductible according to the IRS, because as they are considered a business expense. So again, minimal impact. What is not being considered with HB 5290 is the loss of revenue that was realized in HB 6688 from trucks that simply pass through Connecticut, all the while damaging our roads. Many of these pass-through trucks may never stop in Connecticut or fill up at one of our many fueling stations, thus never contributing to the state's coffers. What is even more egregious, by not having the highway use tax, the residents of Connecticut will bear 100% of the cost of maintenance repair, which could result in higher income taxes. Working families who also bear a disproportionate cost for motor vehicle repairs and maintenance resulting from the conditions of our abused roads. As someone who travels from Danbury to Hartford and is in the auto repair business, I know this to be true. For most working families drive higher mileage, older vehicles, that the abuse on their cars adds to more frequent repairs. We must not, we should also support the 17 cents a mile charge for trucks with a GVW of over I'm sorry, I'm just tripping over my words here. 80,000, I've got like one paragraph left, sorry. That add a load of 9,600 times that of a passenger motor vehicle. These trucks rarely haul products purchased by working families. and will not pass their costs on to working families. By preserving the highway use tax, the state will be free to appropriate hard-earned tax dollars in areas that truly need, helping hard-worked families in transformative ways such as support for our schools, support for brownfield remediation programs, ensuring environmental justice in underserved communities, open space projects, affordable housing, and a better quality of life. We should ensure that those who use our roads have some skin in the game, pay their fair share, and give the taxpayers a break that they deserve. Please reject 5290. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Nice to see you back in the room with us. I had one quick question. Are you at all, given your role in the legislature before, aware of the sort of the general terms of the, so we have some previous testifiers have talked about that we have significant funds coming available to us potentially from the federal government. But the fact that Connecticut will have to match some of those funds with its own funds in order to access them, are you knowledgeable about that at all?
I am knowledgeable to some aspect, not all the points of it, but I will say that when we, anytime, as you know, as legislators, any legislation that we bring forward, we're thinking beyond what we have actually today and what we're dealing with in the future. We also need to look at, as we keep talking about cutting, and that's how we kind of got in this problem to begin with. We kept cutting and cutting and cutting, and we kept neglecting our infrastructure to where we found ourselves, when Governor Lamont first came into office, and I believe you and I were in the same freshman class at the same time, we were facing a fiscal problem. And, because of responsible budgeting and small fees like this, we've been able to climb out. That being said, we need to make sure that we preserve and protect against the future to ensure that we don't find ourselves back in that condition, that we leave things better than when we found them.
Thank you. Representative Paletta.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you so much, my former colleague here that I know well. And thank you for joining us for your testimony. And I do apologize for my tardiness. There's an awful accident on 84 in Southington. So in a time when we're talking about transportation, it's unfortunate what happened. But I do have a quick question for you, and I'm wondering if you can expound on this a little bit. In your testimony, you had just mentioned that a lot of the goods that are carried on these trucks are not necessarily affecting, let's say, the everyday goods purchased by, call it middle class. Do you have any examples that you can point to, like that? Are these trucks carrying, let's say, like heavy materials as opposed to goods that would go to a supermarket? Because my understanding in my district, at least, is that, the cost of eggs, the cost of groceries, the cost of gas, anything pretty much delivered on a truck into my district has seen a massive increase in terms of the cost over the last couple of years. But is there any evidence, and I'm not refuting what you're saying, is there any evidence showing that that the goods that are carried on these vehicles are not necessarily the goods that everyday consumers use?
So, and thank you for that question. I was going to say, I knew you weren't Representative Buckus, but yeah, and I do. I was in the same car accident you are. In fact, I saw the sign that said accident at exit 30. So I got off and took the shortcuts around the other way, which I guess is one of the benefits of coming up to the legislature a lot. A lot of the costs that we see in the inflationary costs aren't necessarily with the trucking. It's actually with just products in general and cost. The cost of eggs we have found is a lot had to do with the avian flu and had to do with other things that had nothing to do with trucking. When you look at the rate scales that you see, for example, on a truck that's got a GVW of 28,000 pounds, you're looking at 2.5 cents a mile. Now, for people in my district, if you're coming from New York, that's a whole 14 cents in tax. That's not, it's not too far. I'm 7 miles from the border. But I also look at what we as taxpayers are paying for maintaining these roads. Use taxes, we should have those who use the very products or the very services that Connecticut provides should contribute to that. So we're paying one way or the other. I would rather have, there's an old saying that, with many hands makes for light work. Well, with many funding streams comes a lot less that'll come in as far as having people have to pay in. When you're looking at the massive amount of impact that happens, and I know this being in business myself, I mean, materials just for things that I have that don't even come in on trucks just have gone through the roof. And it, and there's a lot of factors with that. And a lot of it has to do with just the economic times that we live in. But as far as my belief that if you use a product and you are using a service, that we all need to contribute to that. And we're disproportionately, if we do not have those that are contributing to the issue, can add more to it, then yeah, we are all paying for that. And the bigger part that isn't being covered here is though, yes, you will have with cost of doing business, you do have some dollars that do get passed on to the consumer because that's just the nature of the beast. But we're not, again, like I said in my testimony, really looking at those trucks and those industry that just pass through the state, that abuse and use our roads. And like the previous person that testified via Zoom, tolls was denied. And I understand there were many issues and there were many concerns there that were not being addressed. And I agreed with the fact that we shouldn't have gone that right, that there were too many questions. But yet when we have an industry that is going from, say, New York entering an I-84, for example, the reason why the tax, or why the traffic and the truck tax is so high there, or the truck use is so high there, is many of these trucks are avoiding the George Washington Bridge and I-95. They don't want to go down there and deal with the expensive bridge. They'd rather hit the Newburgh Bridge, or they'd rather hit the Tappan Zee and come across at a cheaper rate. But yet they pass through the state. They don't stop here, and they're not picking up fuel here, so they're not paying the fuel tax. They're not buying materials here, so they're not contributing to Connecticut. But yet their added weight and their added use to the roads is adding to that abuse. So we are losing in that revenue. And unfortunately, some of our local businesses, and me being a small business, I am very sympathetic to any costs and overhead costs that goes with a small business. But at the same time, we need to look at the whole picture. And the whole picture being that we should be collecting on all of the work that needs to be done, all the revenue that should be here to help pay for the very right and the use that these roads are there. Because again, I mean, I'm sure when you go knocking doors, what's one of the things that people complain about the most? The roads are horrible. My car's getting beat up. I could tell you last year I was blowing tires left and right coming up by 84, hitting potholes and hitting other things and debris and issues. So though I do believe there will be some cost sharing, I think in the overall, looking at the bigger picture at the revenues of those who do not service Connecticut, but pass through, those who use the roads. And when you look at these loads, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, me being in the car business, I learned a lot about axle loads and, the basic mathematical formulas of calculating how much load and how much pressure and how much displacement that I think we need to recover some of that.
Thank you. And I know I'm nearing the end of my time. I'll just say that respectfully disagree in some regard. One, electric vehicles where, as you were part of the legislature, we have this roadmap to get to electric vehicles in the next, I think, 20 years. And I mean, there's no way really to collect this from electric vehicles. So that's a big problem. Two, the businesses that are in Connecticut that are going to be adversely impacted by this tax undoubtedly are going, I think, in my opinion, maybe we disagree on this, that are going to have to pass this on to their consumers, to their customers, and the customers then, of course, will pass it on to the consumers. So I hope there's a way that we can find common ground on this. I know that, we've worked together on things, and it's unfortunate that there's this small group of businesses that are getting impacted by it. And as you said, there's a lot of out-of-state trucks coming through. And I think all of us agree that out-of-state trucks, no problem. If you're using our state as a cut through, you should pay for it. But it's these businesses in the state of Connecticut that are getting hit by this that I think not only is it unfair to them, but it's unfair to the folks that are going to be consuming these products that are going to see a higher cost. So thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Good to see you again, and not at the flower show. We ran into each other at the Hartford Flower Show.
Or even at the brewery.
Indeed. Although that was a while ago. So thank you for coming here today. I know we heard, I believe it was Mr. Holden talk about the fees he pays to Connecticut, and that the imposition of the highway use tax will result in a 40% increase in what he's paying to the state. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think there's, as we know with any legislation, we have unintended, consequences that are going to happen. And we have issues to where there's not going to be one magic bullet that fits it all. Do I think it's fair? No, and sadly, as you look at this and say that it will be passed on, it will be passed on in other ways. We're paying for it regardless. So the Connecticut taxpayer is going to be paying for this. Now, whether it's going to be in some cases that they have a product that may be more costly, they're also going to be paying for it in their normal taxes, because like it or not, we need to repair, we need to fix, and need to maintain these roads. And we have found what years and years of neglect look like, and now we find ourselves, as some say, drinking out of a fire hose. We have so many failing bridges and so many failing parts of infrastructure that we really have no choice at this point. But we also need to look at what do we do to make sure it's fair? Is it unfortunate for his business? It's absolutely correct, but it's also unfortunate to the taxpayers that we then have these pass-through trucks that are contributing nothing but giving us the damage and the problems.
And obviously the pass-through trucks do contribute to Connecticut by virtue of the federal taxes they pay that are then and fees that are then passed on to us. And my other final question is, obviously this was passed during the pandemic, prior to the changes we've seen in our transportation needs, but also prior to both the IIJA and the IRA. Connecticut's going to be receiving $1.62 billion over the next 5 years to repair our aging roads and bridges, with the chance to access competitively $100 billion total. Given that, isn't it now appropriate to say, do we need this $60 million? And even if you accept that you want out-of-state truckers to pay, the disproportionate impact this is going to have on our Connecticut businesses who employ our residents, doesn't it make sense to take a step back and say, hey, we have all this new money. We can look at making up for those years of neglect and not put this burden on our Connecticut businesses.
Well, again, you make valid points, but also at the same time, with we've known in government here, I believe it when I see it, and I believe it when we actually have the dollars come loose. I know with many of the bonding issues that we've done in my municipality, it's like pulling teeth to actually get those dollars and actually get things where they're supposed to go. I would rather err on the side of caution. I would also like to maybe look at what I've stated earlier, where we have those who are using and abusing, and they're not abusing on purpose, just happens to be the nature of the business. Contribute, because either way, the taxpayers of Connecticut are paying for this one way or another. This is not like it's magically going to go away. It is there. And we need to ensure that those, one of my very first bills that we worked hard on was the invasive species bill, which would put a use fee on boating. Now, technically, if I had a bunch of people that were in the boating industry say, look, you can't put that use fee on because you're disproportionately charging extra for me because I have a boat, but yet you're very much preserving and protecting the very resource that you use. We need to have that be across the board. Now, luckily, that bill, when it went through with overwhelming bipartisan support, because we all recognized that it was something that was good, that was something that was healthy. Now, again, that was before we went into the pandemic and the other things. Do I know if there's more funds for that? There may be, but there hasn't been. So we're not sure exactly where we're going to be at the end of this. And again, I kind of like Missouri, I guess, show me, let me see where it's going to be.
All right, thank you. And
Thank you.
And appreciate your input. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions, again, nice to see you. Thanks
Nice
for.
to see you as well. I'm surprised I was so early in the lineup. Glad I didn't get stuck in that
Got lucky.
traffic jam. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
your time and your service.
Next up, we have Brian Parker, who I don't see yet. Followed by Stephen Shore, and then Joseph Ceccarelli. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. Mr. Shore, I believe, is with us. Mr. Shore, there, I see you on Zoom. The floor is yours, sir. You are on mute, however. There, no. You were off mute for a moment there, and then you went back on.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Shore. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and owner of Shore Associates based in Avon, Connecticut. We've been in business now for 22 years, and we perform services for the trucking industry, mostly in Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts, but other states too, in support of doing accounting for taxes, as well as FMCSA and DOT compliance. We are self-considered as an expert in the industry. First of all, there's been some testimony on the issue of the taxes the truckers pay, the gasoline, or excuse me, the diesel fuel tax, and the fact that they are bypassing the tax payments. They are in fact paying for the tax through the IFTA taxes, okay? Regardless if they're buying fuel in Connecticut, they are still going and paying the tax. That's the first misconception. Second, and very clearly, I'm opposed to the 290 bill because of the need for the state of Connecticut to improve their infrastructure. And while the tax is here today, in fact, we've been processing a lot of these tax reports for our clients. The money is here today. It's in the coffers of the Department of Revenue. There are future monies that are talked about in this hearing today with the federal government contributing money. And without having the numbers in front of me, I wonder, with the initial offering from the federal government of future funds, what is the cost associated with improving our infrastructure? Is there enough money from the federal government? Probably not. Okay. Neither here nor there. I am in conflict, one with my own organization and also with my clients. And the conflict, I think, is important to point out. I want to see this tax in place because we make money in doing the tax reports. Okay, that's a nice thing. And of course, the state of Connecticut gets revenue by income tax that filters down. But on the other side, I've heard from a lot of my clients that are opposed to this tax, would like to see it sunsetted. And they just look at their bottom line pockets, not looking at the overall picture of taking care of the infrastructure of the state of Connecticut. I have a suggestion, okay, and I offer my services also, is that rather than sunsetting this particular
30 seconds.
rather than sunsetting this particular tax, they should revisit the tax, okay? And there are a number of things that could be revisited that will improve the collection, improve the auditing, and still get the revenue to the state of Connecticut. That's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, sir. I think we're having a little difficulty hearing you. So I'm going to ask, I know at the end there, you were making a suggestion about, I believe maybe about the reporting or the tax, but if you could repeat that and maybe move a little closer to the microphone.
Okay.
Some of us are having a hard time hearing you.
Not too sure where my microphone is, in fact, in my office here, but I have the video. So let's see, let's move over here. Okay, so I think where your question came about in my last part was I'm offering my services to kind of help the legislature relook at this particular tax and to maintain some revenue, but also to be fair to the trucking industry. There are a number of things that are written in the law. And by the way, I'm not an attorney, but I do read the laws. There are a number of things in the law that allow a trucker to pay less tax based on the amount of weight that they're carrying at any given time. All of my clients have no opportunity to keep track of their weights as they move from one part of the state of Connecticut to the next. Thus, we are telling them the best way to address the issue is to pay the highest amount of tax you possibly can pay, which in a tractor trailer situation is 80,000 pounds or 10 cents per mile. Yes, we can go down to 2.5 cents. However, there has to be good accounting, and this tax is subject to audit. And the DRS auditors, who I speak to on a regular basis, indicate you have to have a lot of supporting documentation to get that discount down to the lower rates. But I think this whole tax needs to be revisited and to be fair to the state of Connecticut residents, the state of Connecticut businesses, as well as to make sure that the out-of-state people pay their fair share. hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, sir. One quick follow-up to that. We've heard some testimony about the onerousness of the process of paying the tax, in particular, the fact that the tax has to be paid monthly. Is that your experience that adds a significant administrative burden for your clients to do that every month?
Very good question. Not only does it cause them to give us data every month versus for IFTA, which is quarterly, okay? But it's also a little bit of a burden on our end because we have been used to quarterly taxes with a break for a couple of months each quarter, not to be burdened with all these tax reports. And now we have to do a little bit of extra burdening on my staff to do monthly taxes. So it's a little bit of burden. If I was to be participant in a panel the legislature developed this this tax, I would have highly recommended that the tax be done quarterly, not monthly. Much easier for businesses, much easier for my organization that does the taxes.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no further questions, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Dustin Nelson, who I believe is on Zoom,
Yes,
followed by Brianna Young and then Carl Stebbins. So, Mr. Nelson, the floor is yours.
I'm Dustin Nelson of Vernon, Connecticut. Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman, Vice Chairs, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I serve as the immediate past president for the Connecticut Nursery and Landscape Association, a collaboration of over 300 businesses. The Connecticut green industry accounts for 51% of agriculture production in our state, with a total jobs impact of 43,000 and an economic impact of $4.7 billion. I am testifying today in favor of House Bill 5290, an act sunsetting the highway use tax. As many of you know, Public Act 21-177, an act concerning a highway use fee or HUT, was passed in 2021, imposing a mileage tax on trucks traveling on Connecticut highways. And collection of HUT has begun. And while every resident of Connecticut may not directly pay HUT, we certainly pay it secondhand, and it affects every resident's bottom line. During a time where prices are already on the rise, this additional costs that businesses must recuperate by increasing prices. This makes Connecticut goods and services less competitive in the marketplace and makes it harder for families to justify living in our state. The same is true for the agricultural sector. Increasing farm production and transportation costs will ultimately be passed along to the consumer. If inflation continues, consumers will have to continue to cut back on spending and make hard choices, including whether or not they can afford food. HUT directly impacts at least 25 of our members, generating over $30 million in revenue for Connecticut-based companies. Just like other industries, our members have experienced increases in input costs, which I've outlined previously to this committee regarding Senate Bill 350. As a young professional trying to establish myself in my home state, I have had to have the difficult conversations with my significant other, whether or not we can afford to continue to live here close to our family. Home ownership and starting a family is becoming more difficult and unachievable in our state. Sunsetting HUT would
30 seconds.
would be one step in helping to keep Connecticut affordable. Thank you again for your hard work and dedication to the residents of Connecticut. Your work helps make Connecticut a great place to live and work, and hopefully a place that we can continue to afford to be able to live in. Please vote in favor of Senate Bill 5290. Help make Connecticut goods competitive in the marketplace, as well as Connecticut affordable for our families.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Seeing Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And I see it Connecticut Nursery and Landscape Association. Do you yourself have a landscaping business, Mr. Nelson?
I work for a landscaping company. I'm the operations manager at Frank's Landscape Construction based in Somers, Connecticut.
Right. And do you know offhand what the increased costs there are going to be from the highway use tax?
So only one of our trucks would fall under the highway use tax if we were to pull a trailer with it. So I have removed the hitch from that truck and instructed all of our staff not to pull a trailer with that one truck so we can avoid the additional administrative needs and the extra cost involved with that.
So how does that affect your business if you're having to make decisions? You know, the optimal way, I presume, would be to use that truck with a trailer.
It makes it difficult, especially when, you know, the cost of additional vehicles is at such a high rate right now. So we are having to make do and make additional trips to get the proper materials there. And it ends up costing the consumer more. So, but the burden, as many have described, was so much that this was the better alternative for our business.
So it sounds to me, from your point of view, it's as much the administrative burden as keeping track of that, documenting it and submitting the tax every month as the cost. I mean, they go hand in hand. I don't want to.
Yes. Yeah. And as a small business, and who's not, you know, doing a regular amount of trucking, such as like Herb Holden, which we do depend on them for many of our materials for our jobs. We don't have the capacity to add someone just to take on that administrative burden. That would fall under myself or the owner, who are already stretched to our max and in trying to, you know, bring this whole company together. So then that way we can make sure the 14 employees who depend on us to put food on their table can continue to be working and get paid every week. And if I was to take on additional administrative responsibilities, it would take away from being able to make sure that we can provide for these employees.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. Nelson, for being with us. Next up, we have Brianna Young, who I believe needs to accept our promotion online. And while we're sorting that out, we will go next to Carl Stebbins, who I believe is with us on Zoom. Mr. Stebbins, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senator Fanfara, Representative Horn, Representative Cheeseman, Senator Martin, and distinguished members of the Finance Committee. My name is Carl Stebbins, and I'm a resident of Somers, Connecticut. Following Mr. Nelson, works at Frank's Landscaping right across the street from where I work at New England Tractor Trailer Training School. As all of you know, Somers is a border town that borders East Long Meadow and Hampden, Massachusetts. And I'm thankful and grateful for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of HB 5290, an act sunsetting the highway use tax. I support the bill because I believe it would relieve a costly and burdensome new tax and would present a reasonable solution to an unreasonable tax law. The impact to the trucking industry in Connecticut is significant, and thereby the impact to Connecticut consumers will be significant as well. When cost of operations are increased, cost of goods are increased as well. Businesses operating in bordering towns such as Somers have to contend with the additional challenge of fighting against competing businesses from other states that will more than likely have the luxury of operating in our state while abating the tax. There is no thoughtful plan, in my opinion, that shows how we will actually collect the tax from out-of-state companies. The hot tax is bad for Connecticut for many reasons, but just to name a couple, cost, attacking the trucking industry unilaterally hurts all taxpayers. Driving businesses away from Connecticut by hurting them and penalizing them with taxes that target one industry hurts all of us in the end. The legality of the law. If you look to Rhode Island in the toll situation, they lost that fight. And this could potentially set Connecticut up to have to repay tens of millions of dollars to trucking companies along with legal fees that may be incurred. I stand in strong support of House Bill 5290 and would like to say that sunsetting this inequitable and most likely illegal tax scheme will be a necessary correction to a tax that was passed with no prior public hearing, very little consideration for the Connecticut residents, and is simply a knee-jerk reaction and targeting of the trucking industry when the governor lost his battle to tolls. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, again, thank you for joining us today. Is Brianna Young available yet? We will get back to Ms. Young. Mario Fusaro. Peter Rampy.
Hi there. This is Peter Ramp.
Peter
Good
Ramp.
Good afternoon. Oh, don't worry about it. Some people call me one or the other. No problem. Let me just get myself straight here. I'm Peter Ramp from Wilton, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to articulate my views and recommendations regarding HB 5290. I strongly support this bill for the following reasons. Based on my calculation of elasticity of basic foods, gasoline, and heating, and the cost of trucking. Letting the highway use tax expire will reduce transportation costs, which in turn will have a positive impact on those basic items that I mentioned, food, as well as fuel, as well as gasoline and heating oil. And I also want to make a comment about what was said previously, that some of the heavier items will not get impacted or will not trickle down to the consumer. I strongly disagree with that, because any item that has a value-added tax put on it will ultimately wind up costing the end user, the consumer. As I mentioned, the same really applies for gasoline and fuel oil. Reducing their transport costs to the local gas stations or heating oil depots will have a positive impact on the pocketbooks of drivers, tenants, and homeowners. There's been enough said about the impact and how do we recover that from the federal government paying for some of the road repair costs through their bills. Well, I think that's really what we have to do, is make sure that we get that through our contacts with our House representatives. In summary, again, I support HB 5290 and would very much like for you to consider letting it sunset. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you for serving Connecticut. And I trust you will give my thoughts and recommendations some consideration.
That is why we conduct public hearings, sir. So thank you for joining us today. Seeing no questions, I will call Joe Nichols, who I believe is with us in the room. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Chairman Fanfara and Horn, Vice Chairs Miller and Moore, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Joan Nichols. I'm the Executive Director for Connecticut Farm Bureau Association. On behalf of our 2,500 farm businesses, Connecticut Farm Bureau urges your support of HB 5290 to sunset the highway use tax. Connecticut farmers continue to experience escalating input costs, which cuts deeper and deeper into farm profitability. As was mentioned in my previous testimony, Connecticut farmers operate in a regional, national, and global economy. A USDA Farm Sector Income Forecast report, which was just released on February 7th, 2023, reports U.S. net farm income is projected to fall almost 16% from last year, while costs are expected to increase more than 4% on top of a record increase in production expenses in 2020-22. Those expenses and input costs are affecting Connecticut farmers. The highway use tax is yet another financial and administrative burden negatively impacting an already fragile industry. Even if agriculture were to be exempt from this tax, it does not resolve increased transportation costs of goods and supplies transported onto the farms. Our Connecticut farm products need to be competitive across our region. Farms can only pass this tax on to the consumer until their product hits a price point, at which point the farmer has no other choice to absorb the tax burden or lose market share. Our farmers are already at an economic disadvantage because of our escalating and high production costs to the state of Connecticut. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, Connecticut is expected to receive over $4.1 billion from the Biden infrastructure law since the passage of Public Act 21-177. The HUT tax is a tax on Connecticut farm businesses and Connecticut consumers. It's basic economics. With the influx of federal infrastructure funding, it is time to sunset this tax. We strongly urge your support of HB 5290. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joan. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Thank you for coming here today, Joan. And I know you were here when we were had the public hearing on it, but was it 350? Obviously, you were in favor of a bill that would sunset the tax on agricultural vehicles. Can you explain, obviously, this would apply to all trucks, why you feel not just agricultural vehicles, but also the other trucks in the state should not be subject to this tax?
Because our farming and agriculture touches everything. If a farm has to have bulk fuel delivered to their farm, it's coming in on a truck. If the nursery industry has to get pots, materials, poly, mulch, peat moss delivered to their nursery or to their farm business, it's coming in on a truck. If a truck is doing a delivery to a farm of say, for instance, peat moss delivered down from Canada, and then that same truck makes that delivery to Home Depot, the farm's going to pay that tax. All of this is contributing to escalating input costs. So a lot of material comes into farms that's not necessarily considered a farm vehicle or a farm truck.
Okay, thank you. And I believe when we actually debated and passed this bill on the floor, an exemption was carved out for dairy vehicles. Am I correct?
That's correct. The only trucks that were exempt at the time and still are the bulk milk tankers, because they're the only trucks in our state that can go to 100,000 pounds. Dairy farmers can't pass that on. But you have to remember, and Seth Baylor was here at the press conference on Wednesday, the dairy bulk milk tankers are a very small percentage of the number of loads that farm vehicles haul. If you're looking at harvest season, during harvest season in the fall, they're running hundreds of loads of tractor trailers. And you'll hear from another farm shortly, our poultry industry runs nothing but tractor trailers. So the bulk milk tankers, we appreciated that exemption, but it's a very, very small percentage.
Right. And obviously, we want to encourage, as we know how difficult farming is, farms to continue to exist in Connecticut and not, particularly in view of all the extra cost burdens you face, disproportionately affect you with something like this. So I want to thank you for coming here again and on Wednesday, and appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Paletta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being here. We had a great discussion a couple of days ago, but very briefly, I know it's a Friday. but this is a very important topic to myself, to my district, and quite frankly, to the state of Connecticut. If you could just briefly talk about, because we may have heard a couple of times that this may not affect the everyday consumer. If you could just briefly talk about some of the products that might see an increase, or how this could affect the average, let's say, shopper, should this stay in place, and what kind of an increase average folks could see?
Sure. If you take, for instance, the livestock industry, right? You have to feed your animals. That's feed. That's hay. That's hay that has to be harvested. That's forage that has to be harvested. All of that happens on a truck. Okay? So you're bringing all your feed stock from your fields. You're bringing it back to your livestock operation, whether it's beef, lamb, pork, poultry. You're going to feed the animals. You're going to turn around. You're going to have those animals processed. You're going to put that meat through USDA. You're going to put that meat out into the marketplace. You're trucking all that feed to feed the animal. Then you're trucking those animals to the processing plant. Then you're trucking the processed material back to the consumer, whether it's into the wholesale market, or if it goes to the wholesale market, then it's trucked again into the retail market. Every time a truck touches that product, from the time the forage leaves the field till the time that finished product gets to the consumer, is taxed if it's going on a truck. And
Thank
that's just one example. Agriculture and food is at the beginning of every consumer's plate.
And the same could be said, let's say, for a dozen of eggs.
We are going to hear that today.
My good friend here said, you read my mind, and I hear that very often in my district. What happened to the price of eggs? And I can only imagine what's going to continue to happen to the price of eggs, should this stay in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Zupkis.
Thank you. I just heard the egg price go up to $10 a dozen. It's crazy. I don't understand how people are going to be able to live, quite honestly, because fuel's the same thing. But thank you. And for really talking about, because there was the bill for agriculture trucks and then dairy trucks. Well, it should be all trucks, because yes, your trucks support families, but so do all the other trucks. And so if it's so important that we work on farm trucks and agriculture trucks, it's just as important that we work on all the trucking industry. So thank you for doing that, for bringing up that, because again, all I hear sitting here, it's more and more expensive to live, and people are going to go out of business or move out of the state. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just have to add, in a state like the state of Connecticut, all of our business sectors are intertwined. If Baylor's, they just built a 7-acre dairy barn. That was construction material, concrete, steel, plumbing supplies, electrical. It affects everybody else that's sitting behind me, because we're all intertwined, and it all relies on transportation.
Thank you. I wasn't sure, Representative.
I just put a strawberry that cost me $10 in my
All this
mouth.
talk
I'm
of-
sorry.
Talk of food made you hungry. Representative Barry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Joan. Can you just talk a little bit about the record keeping and how that is affecting businesses?
I hate to sound, it's a nightmare. And the reason it's a nightmare is because, again, we've heard from other businesses, larger trucking companies, smaller trucking companies. The farms are owner operators. Most of them are owner operators. Or, they've got somebody in the office that does a little bit of office work when they're not doing the field work, or they're not driving the truck, or they're not in the farm stand. We have heard that, especially for agriculture, but I'm sure every other sector that's affected by this bill, it's a nightmare, because you're not just tracking your mileage on the interstates, it's every Connecticut road. So our farms, when you, for instance, take Baylor's or Hillendale's here, you know, the truck goes from the feed mill to the poultry house, back and forth all day long. They go by my house in Franklin. Then, you know, they go to the field, they're empty. They come back from the field, they're loaded. They're on this road. It's 5 miles, it's 10 miles. They hit the interstate. You're supposed to track all of that. And then are the trucks half loaded? Are they fully loaded? I heard somebody say, well, just tax it at 80,000 pounds. Well, if you're harvesting from your fields, maybe your truck is half empty because you finished that field. Maybe you've only got 20 or 30,000 pounds. Well, what the heck? We'll just tax it at 80 because nobody's weighing these trucks when they're coming out of the fields. So how do you know, they're rated, if you're running a trailer, the dump, you know, a lot of trucks run the dump trailers, they're at 80,000 pounds, but sometimes they're 20, sometimes they're 30. And then silage and hay changes by weight. If it rains, if it's heavier, if it doesn't rain, it's lighter. How do you track all of this? It's a logistical nightmare.
Definitely sounds like it. Thank you so much for your answer and thank you for being here again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And as always, thank you, Joan, for bringing your considerable experience to the conversation.
Thank you,
Um,
Representative. Thank you.
Next, I want to just double back. There are a couple people who I believe are on Zoom but haven't accepted a promotion. Brianna Young, Mario Fusaro, if you can hear me, please look for the promotion so that we can hear you speak. We will be on the lookout. Next up, Kevin Hussein.
Mario has just.
Oh, Mario. Okay.
So I'm sorry, we're going to Mario or we're going to come to me?
No, well, if we have Mario, who is ahead of you in the line, if you can hear us, Mario, please, I can see you on the screen, but you're muted. Oh, there we go.
Hi. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I've been a resident of Connecticut for 70 years. And I've seen a few things come and go. I remember the tolls on I-95, Wilbur Cross Parkway and Merritt Parkways. They were supposed to be for road maintenance. Where'd the money go? The general fund. I remember the gas tax that was imposed. That was for road maintenance. Where did the money go? General fund. The lottery. That was supposed to be for education. And I understand the money went to the general fund. So where does anybody think that this money is going to go? It's not going to go for road maintenance. It will go in the general fund, like all the other money does. Now, I know you've already talked about some of this, but what people do not understand, obviously, because they're trying to levy this tax, or they have levied this tax, is that trucks deliver our goods. So if you're going to put a tax on them, we, the taxpayers, end up paying that one way or the other. Everything goes up. The last thing on this brings back a very, very old concept, a concept that was around before the Constitution was written. And that's when states used to tax for goods going through their states. Connecticut would tax for goods going to Rhode Island. And Rhode Island would turn around and say, okay, if that's the way you're going to do it, we're going to double tax stuff going through you to get to you. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this tax is going to bring those days right back to us. This is what brought about the Interstate Commerce Act. Now, I'm sure that our learned representatives have looked at this and said, well, it doesn't violate the Interstate Commerce Act. But if you think about it, it does. You're charging for trucks to go through our state, no matter where they go. That's a problem. Because the next thing that's going to happen is Massachusetts is going to throw a tax on their trucks, which now we're going to pay Connecticut tax and we're going to pay the Massachusetts tax. And Rhode Island is going to do the same. There's an old saying, those that fail to comprehend the failures of the past are bound to make the same mistakes again. And in 70 years, I have seen these mistakes made over and over. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, we will, Mr. Hussein, I believe you are with us.
Yes, thank you. Just gonna turn my camera on here. If you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, Senator Fanfara, Representative Horn, vice chairs, ranking members, and other distinguished members of the Finance and Revenue Committee. My name is Kevin Hussein, representing the American Council of Engineering Companies of Connecticut. I'm here today to speak in opposition of HB 5290, an act sunsetting the highway use tax. ACEC Connecticut is the leading organization supporting the businesses and the professional interests of consultant engineering firms in Connecticut. We're roughly over 2,000 employees with highly skilled engineers in over 70 firms throughout the state. A significant goal of the organization is to educate and promote a better understanding of the infrastructure needs of the state and its residents. Economic development depends on a reliable and effective transportation network and infrastructure system. More than 21,000 lane miles and over 5,000 bridges connect the state's cities and towns and carry over 31 billion vehicle trips per year. With these statistics in mind, Connecticut businesses, workers, visitors, and residents need and deserve a transportation system that is reliable, effective, but more importantly, safe. The opportunity to make transformational improvements to Connecticut's transportation infrastructure has never been better. To fully leverage a significant funding that was available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, EJA, we must be prepared to also appropriate state matching funding for the SDF, which comes from the SDF, which is the only healthy until maybe mid-25, mid-26. The highway tax is a fair user-based revenue generator that is paid by commercial vehicles for miles driven through Connecticut. The funds generated by this tax are vital to the health of the SDF and our ability to optimize the available federal funding. Additionally, with the current inflation levels and pending recession, the rainy day fund will dissipate rather quickly in the coming years. Connecticut is in a critical crossroads that it looks to remain competitive in the global marketplace while facing the challenges of reconstructing an aging infrastructure that suffered from years and years of deferred maintenance and underinvestment. Their immediate needs on our roadways, our bridges, and our transit systems. I-95, unfortunately, is a parking lot, and that stretch between Westport and Greenwich just made it to the #1 most congested corridor in the US, in the top 10. Eliminating $90 million annually from the budget is going to have significant impacts to the traveling public. Coming back to the safety aspect, I'll wrap up by saying a recent report released by TRIP, which is a national nonprofit transportation research group based in Washington, D.C., that is sponsored by insurance companies, equipment manufacturers, and businesses involved in the highway construction, found that 61% of Connecticut's major roads are in poor or mediocre condition. Driving on deteriorated roads costs Connecticut motorists $1.9 billion a year, or $722 per driver, in the form of additional repairs, accelerated vehicle depreciation, and increased fuel consumption and tire wear. Connecticut deserves a transportation infrastructure system that provides a network of roads. Okay. Connecticut deserves a transportation network and system that provides a network of better roads, transit, highways, and bridges. And therefore, again, we respectfully oppose HB 5290. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have one quick question about you mentioned the relative health of the Special Transportation Fund in the out years, and that at the moment we have enough to provide debt service, but that changes in the out years. I wonder whether you could just draw that out a little bit.
Yeah, I by no means I am a structural engineer. I'm not a finance person, but based on one of our committees who has a liaison to the DOT, and we look at a forecast of where our programs are. In fact, we think our programs are underfunded by the mid 2020s, 26, 27, and that's because of the underinvestment and the deferred. Unfortunately, like Mario said, some of the reallocation of money from the SDF to the general fund. So, based on the conversations we've had at a high level, that looks like it appears to that the SDF could potentially be insolvent in those years we're looking at, and then of course with the impending inflation or current inflation and pending recession, we look at all the metrics and what it shows out there.
Thank you for that, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Yes,
I'm
Representative.
making it your breakfast. They had a legislative breakfast the other day. So a question, you said we can't do without this funding. And I believe you mentioned the figure 90 million. I think based on certainly the first month, we're looking at 60 million. if we're spending upwards of $2 billion a year on transportation, I believe 60 million is 0.03%. 0.03%. I mean, this is not a huge amount, particularly as it seems to be having a disproportionate impact on those 1,200 Connecticut businesses. And I think you mentioned the, the IIJA and the IRA. Surely, as we look at this, however we want to pay for the roads, we have to bear in mind, the most equitable way to distribute those costs. And I'm just asking if you think, one, this is such an incredibly, we can't do without this 60 million. And two, if you feel, as we've heard, the 1,200 Connecticut businesses who are going to be really seeing a great burden.
That's a great question, and I'll put it in the perspective of, again, as a structural engineer, I've climbed the Waterbury Stacks, I've climbed the Gold Star, and I've also done a lot of small bridges in Connecticut. And when I say climbed, I've done a visual inspection, hands-on inspection. And what we see is that sometimes, and you said, that the 60 million is an insignificant amount, but sometimes it takes a smaller crack, that's insignificant crack, like less than a hairline, to take down a single span bridge that may carry a major road, or that may take out a special emphasis member that brings down one of our infrastructure. We've seen on the transit side, I think it was a shaky wheel that brought down the Norfolk Southern train, the derailment in Ohio. But the point I'm trying to make is that although it may seem insignificant in the bigger picture, sometimes it's the smaller amounts that does help replenish or contributes to something that on the program side that's more urgent, especially in the safety side of things, that could be significant. And that, reducing a program by $500,000 on an inspection or an evaluation or a rehab could potentially see more problems in the long term. Again, coming back to public safety, I guess that's the best way I can do it and to analyze it. But the other way I'd want to say, and it's a little bit unrelated, we did have a meeting with Commissioner Bowden on DRS, and what we found was that also that municipalities are struggling to match the funds for a lot of their the money that's available through DRS and through EJA, and some of that money also goes down to the municipalities, hopefully, and they'll need that for matching for some of the programs that they have locally too. So again, I know I'm a little off track there, but I just wanted to bring that up too. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers a little bit.
There is a challenge for municipalities to match, but my understanding of where this money is going, that would not be going to the municipalities to provide the match. And, if we're looking at fairness and fair taxation, we're putting this burden on our 1,200 trucking companies. Let's, for our argument's sake, are engineering services subject to sales tax?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Zeldis.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming today. I have a couple of questions. I completely agree with you how important the safety of our roads and bridges are. I drive through my town on Route 68 in Prospect every single day, and you have to drive either over the middle line and to get out of the ruts that are torn up, or you have to drive over the white line. You can't drive down the normal part of the road. So I understand on a daily basis how important it is. Does your firm do business with the state?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. And are you familiar, because as the gentleman prior, and I wanted to say to him, he mentioned a lot of monies that are supposed to go into the transportation fund or other funds that are swept away and put in the general fund. And a few years ago, there was Governor Malloy wanted to put a lockbox on the transportation fund. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We voted on it. It did not pass. And the very next vote within 5 minutes swept 35 million out of the transportation fund and put it in the general fund. So do you believe if the money was kept in the general fund, in the transportation fund that was meant to go there, would we need this tax?
That's a great question. Again, I am an engineer. I'm not in the numbers part of it, but I would assume that if we were able to put in that lockbox, which I think we did support it at the time, that ideally then all of that money would help out. But as I mentioned before, there is still a lot of underinvestment in our infrastructure. So even the money that's in the SDF is actually not enough based on our projections.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You, Representative, seeing no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Hussein, for being with us.
Thank you. Have a good Friday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carry on, Axel.
Good day, Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, Representative Cheeseman, Senator Martin, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Axel Carrion, and I'm the Vice President of State Public Affairs for UPS, representing the largest Teamster employer in the country and our over 5,000 Teamsters servicing the more than 15,000 businesses across the state. I also serve as the chairman of the board for the Motor Transport Association of Connecticut, which represents over 500 member companies throughout the state, mostly comprised of small businesses. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to submit this testimony in support of HB 5290, an act sunsetting the highway use tax. I did submit my written testimony, but if I may, I'd just like to focus on some key points that were made during this hearing relating to the cost evasion and competitive balance of this tax. So first on the cost, I'd just like to say, as was mentioned before, Connecticut is now one of only 5 states that has such a scheme, and that includes New York, Kentucky, New Mexico, and Oregon. So what we've found so far since this has been put together is that the cost of this specific Connecticut highway use tax is disproportionate and significantly more expensive than the other highway use taxes that exist across the country. So I'll look just to New York, for example, and we're paying right now 3 times more per mile than we are in our neighboring state of New York in the highway use tax, 3 times more per mile. So even if you agree with the highway use tax, this highway use tax in itself is very disproportionate to the neighboring state. As far as the evasion, that's a key piece because a lot of focus has been placed on out-of-state truckers. And I'd just like to place the emphasis back on the in-state trucking companies, because those are the Connecticut businesses, those are the Connecticut jobs that are important to us. So in regards to the evasion, one study that was conducted on the highway use tax showed that there was a 45 to 53% evasion, highly driven by out-of-state trucking companies. A follow-up study was done 10 years later. And I'm sorry, the first number was 32 to 44%. I apologize, 32 to 44%. That number 10 years later went up to 45 to 53%. And it's simple economics. As out-of-state trucking companies face more pressure on their bottom line, they are more likely to then underreport on their miles, which leads to not only less
30
revenue for the
seconds.
highway use tax, but also an IFTA revenue. So I'll just conclude with this. When we initially passed this through the state, we did not know that Rhode Island would be overturned. We did not know that we would get this infusion of money from the federal government. And we did not know that this highway use tax would be 3 times more than the neighboring state. But we know this now. So I asked the committee before me to please just consider where we are in the state of economics now and consider this highway use tax to be repealed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And just a quick question. We've talked about the impact on the trucking companies and their bottom line, but I believe you said you represented the Teamsters.
Yes, I do.
So.
No, I'm sorry, I don't represent the Teamsters. I represent UPS, the largest Teamster employer.
Okay.
Yes.
So what would be the effect, in terms of employment? Should these trucking companies have to spend so much more money on the tax as opposed to expanding their businesses?
Well, thank you, Representative, for that question. And it really comes down to investment. And I think, Representative, you mentioned earlier about companies leaving the state. And the question is also about investment within the state. So when we look at growing jobs, this is going to be very significant into the equation that we look into. So if we take a look at the specific impact of these jobs, a tractor trailer driver, for example, at UPS, that tractor trailer driver with 4 years on the job on average and a high school diploma is making $112,000 per year. And that's before the $50,000 in other compensation with healthcare and pension. So these are real jobs. So when we think about this tax, we have to strongly consider what kind of future investment will companies have in Connecticut with this kind of tax and just a disproportionate amount in Connecticut itself. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. Representative Claritas DiTrio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying today. My question, do you have an estimate of what this will cost UPS if this tax is imposed? I don't know if I heard that.
Yeah, I don't have the estimate as far as total numbers. I can tell you it's 3 times more per mile than New York. So we do drive less miles than we do in New York. But if you calculate just the per mile, that equation comes out to 3 times more than what we're paying in New York.
And do you know what you're paying in, did you say what you're paying in New York?
No, I don't have those numbers on me. It's just,
You
we
can get them.
look at a per mile
Okay.
basis.
Okay.
Yes,
very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Maroney has a question online. And Senator Maroney, maybe this is the one way you can track me down after trying for the last 3 days.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Fonfara. So my question is, you keep citing the fact that the Connecticut use tax is 3 times higher than the New York state use tax, but are you taking into account the fact that New York has tolls and a higher gas tax? So are you paying more per mile total in Connecticut than you would in New York? Or when you look at the totality, my assumption would be New York, you're still paying more than you are to Connecticut.
Sure. Thank you for the question. It was an apples to apples of highway use tax to highway use tax.
Great. So then you're not considering the fact that New York has tolls, a significant cost to go over either the Tappan Zee or the George Washington Bridge, as well as a higher gas tax. So
No, I'm not
you're
looking at
paying-
tolls or fuel tax or other, wages, things of that nature, specifically the highway use tax, apples to apples. And I should also mention that New York is actually looking at repealing their highway use tax at this time. So
Are
there's
they going to remove the tolls though? Because you'll
that as
still be
well.
paying the tolls.
Senator Maroney, could you repeat your question?
No, I think even if they, I guess it was more of a comment than a question, that even if they do repeal their highway use tax, you will still be paying tolls and fees to use the roads in New York, a user tax for using the roads there.
We're at stalemate here, so.
I'm sorry, was there a question? I thought he.
No, there wasn't
I
a
thought he
question.
said it
Thank
was-
you. I'm all set. Thank you.
Don't have.
No.
You don't have to. Okay, great. Senator Maroney, any other questions?
No, thank you. Thank you, Senator Fonfara.
Thank you.
Representative Barry, Mr. Carry on. Representative Barry has a question. Please prepare
I thought I was
yourself.
relieved. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I'm always causing trouble. You said that New York was thinking of repealing theirs. Do you know the reasons why?
My understanding is the evasion rates is a big part of the consideration.
Do you know what the collectability is in New York?
I believe it was between 40 and 50% evasion rates in New York.
Okay, thank you. I think now you can leave.
I'll double check and make sure Senator Fonfara says so.
Representative Barry, I guess if staying here all day through every public hearing and meeting causes trouble, I wish we had a lot more trouble among members. Mr. Carrion, I'm a little bit confused when you say about this tax is anti-competitive, it hurts truckers. And I agree, the trucking, having a job in trucking is a fantastic opportunity for those who enjoy driving, those that want to be independent. But if you have a state, and you mentioned specifically New York, that has tolls, that has other fees, and has a highway user tax, irrespective of what level it is, it has one. We don't have those other things. So how is it that we're at a competitive disadvantage versus New York?
Sure. And I would say that New York is not the model that I would say as far as from a competitive point of view. There's also other surrounding states. There's Pennsylvania. There's other states that from a logistics perspective, we look at from a competitive balance. So when I say respect to competitive balance, it's a regional. When I mention New York, it's an opportunity just to learn from what we see from the highway use tax in New York. So I bring up New York, not necessarily because there's a greater balance within New York from a cost model, but more just from the lessons learned from the highway use tax within New York.
Right, but don't we have the competitive advantage because we don't have those other taxes on your drivers?
I would say the Northeast is a challenge, generally speaking. So I don't have the numbers specifically on our costs in Connecticut versus New
But just
York.
common sense. If we don't have tolls, if we don't have the other tax that you mentioned, we have a higher user fee now. Seems to me we're at irrespective of how you feel about this tax. I'm saying, aren't we at a competitive advantage vis-a-vis a state, and virtually every other state in the Northeast has tolls? It seems to me that, and I don't know if it's adequate enough. I don't think it is to maintain our highway system and our roads in Connecticut. There hasn't been support yet for tolls. I mean, at some point, that, you know, those chickens are going to come home to roost. But you did cite New York, and you say the Northeast is not, is a challenge. And it just seems to me that maybe we're the state that people would want to drive through as opposed to the other states that you say people are evading Connecticut. Drivers are evading Connecticut. Where do they go if everywhere else around is higher than we are?
So Senator Fanfara, I would say that as far as our organization, and I think in the industry in general, we have not been against paying more when we need to for the roads and bridges. We've been supportive, UPS has in the past, raising the federal fuel tax. We've been supportive before raising registration fees. So as far as paying more, it's not a matter of not wanting to pay more. We will pay more, especially when that money goes toward roads and bridges. That makes our job a lot easier. We're able to service our customers. I think the question here is the mechanism that's being used. It's this highway use tax specifically. So we're supportive of making sure that we have funds that support our roads and bridges. But as far as the mechanism that's being used, we're opposed to the Connecticut highway use tax, the way it's being applied today. There's a lot of other expenses as well. As was mentioned, there's a monthly reporting. There's also third-party additional expenses that are related to the highway use tax, especially in organizations large as ours. And there's also additional investments that have to be made with the technology within our system, within our vehicles, telematics upgrades, the different technologies that you have to upgrade to also make sure from a compliance perspective that your reports are accurate as far as mileage reporting and other related requirements from the actual tax. So there are other expenses from the tax that aren't just specifically from a per mile basis. There's also additional investments that have to be made.
Lastly, did your organization, did your company take a position on tolls in Connecticut when it was before us?
We did.
Can you tell us what that was?
We oppose the tolls.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Paletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for going after you, of course. Very quickly, I just wanted to chime in. Number one, I represent Watertown, which has a large UPS facility, a great partner with our community. And I think I need to mention here that a couple of years ago, we passed a bill in the legislature that would otherwise help those re-entering into society after previously being incarcerated to actually get a job. And one of the industries was your industry. I was proud to support that bill. It was a bipartisan bill. My fear with this tax that I think is somewhat discriminatory, that it may negate what we did 2 years ago. But I won't talk about that right now because I know it's for a different day. The question I have, and if you could very briefly explain it, how this tax adversely impacts your industry, but maybe not another industry that would be in the same, again, we've been hearing this 1,200 businesses across the state of Connecticut. You are one of the 1,200 businesses. Is that the same in other states? Because we've heard that it's been repealed in like 20 other states. So was it repealed for the reason that it was a discriminatory tax?
Well, I can't get into the individual 21 states, but what I will say collectively is what the states recognize is that it placed a significant more burden on the in-state trucking companies versus out of state. So when you look at it, the highway use tax, initially you're trying to capture out of state truckers, but the more that continue to evade the system, the more of the burden is being put on in-state trucking companies. So when we look at repeal across the nation of those 21 states, that's a significant factor that goes into the equation when they see at the end of the day, it's hurting their in-state businesses more than what they're trying to do by capturing out-of-state revenue.
And I will just end with this. I think there's a shared goal on this committee to properly fund transportation, our special transportation fund. And as you alluded to, I don't think there's one person that will deny the fact that we need to improve our roads across the state of Connecticut. I mean, there's so many bottlenecks in so many areas. And I think the governor identified 25 or 30 projects a couple of years ago that they wanted to tackle. And there's no disputing that. The question is, how do we raise funds in a fair manner? And your industry seems to be getting hit harder than others, and that's a little concerning to me. Thank you.
And thank you. And we would agree with that assessment that we do agree that we want to pay for our roads and bridges. We just want to do it in a sensible way that makes sense and protects small businesses throughout the state of Connecticut. And we are more than willing to have that conversation and sit down at the table and what makes sense for everyone.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Michael Ritchie.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Ritchie. I'm the CEO of BioAg Distribution. We're located in Connecticut here. I'm a 5th generation farm also from this state, all the way back to H.P. Hood, who is my great uncle. This tax, I'm here to absolutely agree that it needs to be sunsetted and repealed. It is beyond thinkable that you are asking us to pass this on to our customers. We're the only BioAg company manufacturing wise in the entire United States that does what we do. We take manure from farms, which is another whole side of their issues, not just their own product, but now they're paying to get rid of their manure because the EPA passed 2 statutes back 2 years ago, which now come into effect January 1st of 2024, making my company the only one in the United States that can actually deal with their manure waste legally and honestly. That includes all the pellets that are manufactured in our state now for fuel for heating your homes. They can no longer do it with the whole wood, as they say, claimed. It's only my manure-based products that can be used legally based on the carbon that we don't put out. So I ask you again, we only have 8 tractor trailers that are loaded. We're paying that full tax no matter what, whether I got 1 pallet on it or I got 10. Because it's just too hard to sit down and figure out which miles, which streets, which roads. And yes, we run an exorbitant amount of extra miles in this state because just the town of Windsor Locks has over 40 roads that are marked trucks not to use this road. So what options do we have? Get the ticket, pay a $500 ticket, or go around those streets? We have no options. And that's the way the entire state is, period. So again, I'm here to absolutely support the repeal of this tax, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Bauer.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Thank you to the co-chairs and to the members of the committee. I'm David Bauer. I'm VP of State and Tax Policy for the American Trucking Associations, the largest trade group representing motor carriers, big, small, everything in between. ATA supports this legislation for all the reasons you've heard today so far. And we join in having significant policy and legal reasons why the highway use tax indeed should be repealed. I have submitted a written testimony that goes into a bit of a further detail, but in the interest of time, and because there's a Husky game coming up, I'll just summarize a few key points. I hear a lot that the highway use tax is not replacing any lost revenue due to the state. Trucking pays its fair share through multiple tax regimes specifically designed to ensure that our members provide an appropriate and actual return for the usage of the state's roads. There's two regimes that we principally pay through. The entire purpose of the International Fuel Tax Association, the International Registration Plan, is to ensure that a state receives the appropriate return for usage of state roads while not burdening the carrier or the state unduly with administrative expenses. What the highway use tax is actually doing is adding an additional layer of tax on commercial carriers traveling into the state, while also burdening Connecticut's own family trucking businesses. From our perspective, and I've heard this as one reason, it's not the responsibility of one industry, even one as important as trucking, to support any state's borrowing authority when we already feel we pay into the state's coffers through these numerous tax regimes. And I guess, and we have agriculture members in our group, we would also question why the General Assembly elected to exempt dairy trucks, which, often are the heaviest trucks on up to 100,000 pounds, heaviest trucks on the road, if the purported purpose of this tax was to ensure proper return for trucking usage of Connecticut's roads. In addition, we have written to the Department of Revenue Services, noting some legal concerns that we have. One is a credentialing requirement that actually requires a permit in the truck. We feel that's preempted by federal law. We have not heard back from the Department of Revenue Services. And the other is Commerce Clause concerns related to interstate commerce impact. We're still analyzing that at this point. And then without belaboring the point, thank you. Without belaboring the point, other states have attempted this type of tax regime. We've seen inevitable evasion, considerable administrative expenses, to the point that 21 states have elected to repeal their highway use tax. So I'll pause there. I really appreciate the committee's indulgence, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Thank you for testifying today. Just a quick question, the credentialing requirement. You mentioned you had significant concerns about that on a legal basis. Can you just explain what that is and why that might be a barrier to the implementation of this law or tax?
Sure. Thank you. So I had actually uploaded our letter that we sent in part of my testimony. I'm not sure if that came through, but in 2005, Congress passed a law authorizing the Unified Carrier Registration Act. And to be brief, what that basically did is, you all maybe remember when you grew up, you'd see on the side of a truck, 60 stickers, for example, authorizing operation in a bunch of different states. That law essentially, by an act of Congress, kind of eliminated all those credentialing requirements and enumerated 5 specific exemptions where you would have to have a credential or a permit on the truck, for example, a sticker on the side for fuel tax. This Connecticut permit, we feel, is facially preempted by federal law. I'm happy to provide the committee further on that, but that one to us was a fairly, we've inquired of the department. We just haven't heard back yet.
Okay, so thank you. So because that's required specifically by Connecticut and not other states, and the federal government has said this is the stuff you need to have, that would be the concern. And I didn't see that letter you sent. So if you could send it in again to the administrator, the clerk, because I'd be interested to see that.
Of course, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Representative Zupkis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you mentioned, and I missed it, about do trucks from other states coming through Connecticut, do they pay anything to the state of Connecticut when they come through? Forgetting about this tax, but are there any other fees or charges that trucks pay?
Yes. So through the International Fuel Tax Association, what you would have is, and most of this is done by third parties necessarily, some firms do it in-house, but you would have an ability to track the miles you drive through each individual jurisdiction I say jurisdiction because Canada is a part of this as well. So you register with one base state. For example, if I'm based in, I'm in Maryland, if I'm in a Maryland carrier, I would report all the miles I drive in Connecticut, in New York, in whatever state I'm in. And then that gets sent to the International Fuel Tax Association. From there, monies are distributed quarterly to the states. I think it was referred to earlier, quarterly. So Connecticut does receive for the usage of the roads through IFTA and IRP, you know, the miles driven in the state, they are reflected in what our members pay into the two tax regimes.
Trucks already pay coming into this state. So this would be addition. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. James Salemi.
Salemi. I'm the general manager of Tuxasaurus Fuel of Meriden, Connecticut. Tuxasaurus Fuel is a full service provider of petroleum and propane products to the retail and wholesale market, including storage and distribution. I'm grateful for the opportunity to submit my testimony in support of HB 5290, an act sunsetting the highway use tax, because it would relieve another costly, burdensome new tax. This tax will have an impact on our bottom line at a time when increasing costs, especially due to inflation, is making it difficult to operate a business. The HUT tax, when it was imposed, I don't think everybody realized the hidden dangers that were in this, especially the office complications, as others have discussed, to manage this tax. The constant monitoring of paperwork and waits to make sure that we can have this done on time so we can pay our fees. Second, I don't think anyone realized the end users that everybody represents. I myself have had multiple lengthy conversations and or arguments with end users who refuse to pay the bill because it's another tax. And we've had to renegotiate contracts, whether it was because of a penny, 10 cents, or $10, because they say, if you're going to tax us, you're doing more for less, and you're going to add the tax in. Having an extra tax when the state will receive billions from a federal infrastructure law, possibly, coupled with the transportation fund, maybe running at a surplus, should be a solid case to relieve our business of the additional tax burden. And I would just like to talk about a couple taxes that we already pay as a company. We operate 25 tractor trailers in the state of Connecticut right now. Yearly, just our diesel tax that we pay to operate our trucks is $150,000 to DRS. Another $50,000 in registration fees. Now carried out, this tax, we've already paid $11,000 in the first 2 months. And this is a slow period. Carried out, we're between $90,000 and $100,000 that we're going to have to pay for tax. Added office staff. We're figuring 25,000 right now, but it's probably going to balloon up to $40,000 to $50,000 in added office staff just to manage the tax. There was a comment before about truckers need to pay their fair share. The trucking industry does pay its fair share, and I want to touch on something, us as a business. We're a distribution and a wholesaler, so the DRS in the first 8 months or
You've reached 3
past 8
minutes.
months,
Please
thank you.
summarize.
We've contributed to DRS $3.8 million in diesel tax. That's a lot of solid money. We pay our fair share. We do not need another tax to burden us and our end users. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no question, Representative Piscopo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Just a quick question. I was just curious. Well, this tax is pretty new, so I don't know if you've worked this out yet, but when you make a delivery to a customer, are you in your invoice, do you segregate that tax, this new tax out, or?
We try to. And some of our customers have come back and say, no, we want it bundled in. So we had to renegotiate contracts that we did 2 years ago when this was implemented, when this was first arrived. So now 2 years later, they're like, you're not changing the structure. You need to figure it out. So we have both ways, showing the tax or built into the rate.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Veach.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out to testify today. With the fact that people buy this fuel usually ahead of time, what kind of a cut is your company taking by having to add this tax or absorb this tax for past purchases, if you will, that have been booked now for years? And what kind of a loss is that? That's got to be tremendous for you.
Yeah, I don't have the total numbers, but if you just take an average trucking bill to move product from point A to point B, it could be $10 on every delivery, which doesn't seem like a lot, but some customers take 3 deliveries a day. If you carry that out, it's $30 per customer a day times 5 days, carry it out 52 weeks in a year. That's solid money.
So it's substantial.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming out and sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Representative Case.
Good afternoon or good evening. Here, Senator Farnfara, Representative Horn, Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman. I wanted to come for you today in support of 5290. A few concerns, and I wanted to turn it over to a good friend next to me from Connecticut Mulch. My concerns here, and putting my hat on here in Hartford as ranking member on Human Services, we're trying to lower costs for our lower and middle class. I live out in the northwest corner. As we do this, we get everything by truck. All this is going to do, and what we're seeing has happened, it's going to trickle these little penny things up and up and up. We're trying to get people so they can be on a stable ground, whether it's with their SNAP dollars, their TANF dollars, but some of the unintended consequences. When you deliver salt to a municipality, it's by a third-party carrier. They have that tax on it. They're getting ready for their budgets. They got to figure that out. When you're looking at LIHEAP dollars, those dollars are figured out on the harbor down in New Haven. Nobody gets a chance to figure this tax into the cost. The state doesn't give anybody help for that. We have to think about this and talk about it in the sense of our middle to lower class, the constituents, the taxpayers of Connecticut. The little guys are the ones that are going to get hurt. We talk about the people out of state. We want out of state truckers. Those out of state truckers are bringing products for us here in Connecticut. We're trying to get our product out so we can sell it to other states. This tax at $90 million is just a tax on our lower and middle class that's just going to keep creeping it up. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Kirk from Connecticut Mulch.
Thank you for having me. My name is Kurt Lindeland with Connecticut Mulch, Connecticut Organics.
Have you signed up to testify today?
I'm sorry?
Did you sign up to testify? Are you on our list? Just put a note.
He's with me today, Senator. Is that?
Okay, but he has not signed up to testify, right?
No, he sent testimony in and there was a glitch with how it was signed up. His testimony in.
Please proceed.
Again, Kurt Lindeland, Connecticut Mulch, Connecticut Forest Products, and Connecticut Organics. In Enfield, Connecticut, we are a 46-year-old family business, second generation. Obviously, I'm the second generation. We've heard so much today, a lot of numbers, and before I came here, I thought about what I was going to say, and I really want to only make one point here today, and it's not to back up my company. It's not to defend my company or my parents' company. It's not to defend the employees that have to go through all this and go through the paperwork flow and the nights trying to figure out how many miles here and roads here and so on and so forth. It's not even to defend my customers. In the end, we're here to defend the taxpayers of Connecticut, because in the end, they're the ones.
30 seconds.
They're the ones that are going to end up paying this bill. Nobody else. And with inflation and everything going on, it's beyond me that we're going to keep passing it on to them. And I thank you for your time, and I'd love to answer some questions.
Thank you very much. Representative Claire Distria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying today. Do you have any idea, an estimate? I don't know if you said it, what it will cost your company if this new tax is not sunsetted?
Right, so we have about 39 trucks and we estimate somewhere around $150,000 a year.
And do you have any ideas? Have you speculated what that will cause your company? Will you have to lay people off or?
I mean, like we all say, I have to pass it down to that end user, right? So they're gonna end up buying less from us, just like every other industry in Connecticut. So it's just gonna ripple all the way throughout Connecticut.
Do you think
Yeah.
it may drive customers out of state? for a different
Absolutely.
company?
It might drive companies out of state, absolutely.
Exactly. Thank you for your testimony today, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Anyone else? Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming here today. And I know you didn't want to talk specifically about your company, but we've heard a lot about the taxes that are paid to Connecticut that people don't necessarily think truckers don't pay, and the IRP and I guess the ITFA. Can you talk about those taxes and what your company in particular is sending to Connecticut through those?
My office certainly would. I know Tina in my office and all the people that work for me that do an incredible job. They know those numbers like the back of their hand. It's in the hundreds of thousands. It's an ungodly amount of money that we pay and shouldn't be anymore.
And obviously, as I discussed with an earlier testifier, you're paying local property taxes. You're obviously, how many people does your company employ?
We are mid-40s. We're seasonal, but we go mid-40s and then all the way up into the 60s.
And do you offer benefits to your employees?
Full benefits, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Jason Sewell. Jason Sewell. We'll come back if he's. Dennis McBride.
Thank you all for your time. I'm here to address the topic of HB 5290 and to show my support of this bill. I'm a software engineer, and while I'm not directly affected by this tax, I do feel its effects. As many of the previous speakers have mentioned, those costs are passed down to the consumer. This results in a flat tax where all citizens pay the same rate. That's because a carton of eggs is the same truck taxed whether it's brought to Whole Foods or to Walmart. Flat taxes bring an unfair burden on those who need help the most. Think of a single parent with 3 kids. In Connecticut, we understand the value of a progressive tax system. If you own a more expensive home, you pay more in property taxes. If you buy a more expensive car, you pay more in sales taxes. We also need stable infrastructure. We need good roads, and we need to pay for this with taxes, but not this tax. I request that we look for alternative ways to generate this revenue. In conclusion, I support HB 5290 and sunsetting the use of the highway tax. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Representative Zupkis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a comment. Thank you. Because your point is so well taken, whether you're delivering eggs to Whole Foods, which we call Whole Paycheck, or to Walmart, and that's where I shop. And so you are exactly right. The people that really have a hard time, the single mom with 3 kids, or the single dad with 3 kids, or the people that we fight for, they're getting affected by this also. So I just really appreciate you bringing that point out.
Before you go, so if we were able to make this progressive, if we could identify, just say theoretically, where the truck was going and we taxed accordingly, would you be in favor of the tax then?
So long as it affects those people who can afford the extra tax the most, I would support that tax. Yes.
If there were a way of making it progressive, you'd be supportive of it.
Yes, I believe that.
Thanks. I'm sorry, Representative Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, DJ. Nice to see you. I just want to thank you for coming and giving the perspective of a consumer and someone that doesn't actually affect your business, but you as a consumer. Have you seen any indication of this tax in anything so far?
It would be hard for me to judge due to general inflation affecting the price of everything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ed Hoffman.
Good afternoon. I'm here in strong support of HB 5290 and Act 2 Sunset, the highway use tax. And first of all, I want to say I'm very impressed with how many times the topic of eggs and chickens have come up today. Because I'm the egg and chicken guy, but it's pretty impressive. It's probably come up, I don't know, 20 times. Anyway, Chairman Fonfara and Horn, Vice Chairs Miller and Moore, members of Finance and Revenue and Bonding Committee, I urge your support of HB 5290 to sunset the highway use tax. My name is Ed Hoffman. My farms are located in Basra and Franklin, which we are the highest taxpayers in those towns, Lebanon and Colchester. We employ 350 full-time employees. We haul over 100 trailer loads of eggs a week, over 100 trailer loads of feed a week, and over 100 trailer loads of manure a week. We are part of a company that operates in 5 states, and it makes us the 4th largest egg producer in the country. And Connecticut is by far the highest cost for us to produce eggs in. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa are significantly lower cost to produce eggs in those states. So this tax definitely affects our bottom line here in Connecticut. PA 21177 was passed in 2021, which imposed a mileage tax on trucks traveling on Connecticut highways. Collection of the use tax began January 1st of 2030. Since the passage of that bill, Connecticut farmers who are at the very beginning of the food and horticulture supply chain have experienced unprecedented increases in farm and input costs. Grain, which is a global commodity, accounts for 60% on average of farm production. The cost of grain has increased significantly since 2021. Farms continue to experience supply chain disruptions and labor shortages. The highway use tax will create another hurdle for our business as we already deal with increased transportation costs negatively affecting our bottom line and creating even greater cost differences in Connecticut versus other parts of the country. As it was mentioned in previous testimony, over the course of the last 3 years, we in this industry have experienced increases in all costs. This tax will roughly have a $100,000 impact annually on our ability to deliver eggs while traveling on roads in Connecticut.
30 seconds.
This becomes another disadvantage having facilities in Connecticut versus other states that we operate in. These types of monetary impacts are factored into our business decisions on where we reside and where we expand in the future. This also creates an administrative burden keeping track of daily mileage. Connecticut business farms operate in domestic, international, and global economy. Increased farm production costs in Connecticut are nationally expected to continue as farmers face challenges from climate change, labor shortages, and growing demand for domestically grown products. I urge your support for the bill and sunset this tax. Thank you. Can I take any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Representative Paletta.
Glad to hear your industry. I come from a family that originally were farmers in Italy, and my grandparents took great pride in having chickens in their backyard, although I don't think their neighbors like that. So they weren't really affected by the price of eggs. But when I'm around my district and I'm talking to folks that are shopping every day, they keep telling me, you know, this is something that hits hard because people use, you know, poultry and eggs regularly. Middle and lower income people depend on poultry and eggs regularly. So when the price goes up, just like your bottom line gets affected, their bottom line gets affected. But, you know, and I know, again, I don't want to keep going on about this, but if you could just explain briefly how we may not in the state of Connecticut be as competitive as some of the states that you talked about, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Briefly explain how the competitiveness in the playing field is not necessarily level here
Right.
in the state of Connecticut.
So first of all, the greatest cost in producing a dozen eggs is feed. The other states where we produce eggs in for lower cost, corn is there, the grain is there, all the ingredients for the feed is already there. To feed all the chickens that we have in Connecticut, which is about 4 million chickens here in Connecticut, we have to rail in all the ingredients. So everything is 99.9% of what we feed the chickens gets railed in. So it's probably about an added 10 cents a dozen to feed our chickens here in Connecticut versus other states. Labor cost is higher, taxes are higher, electric is higher. For me to build chicken houses in Connecticut, it's much higher. We've been on a cage-free kick here in Connecticut, mostly to supply cage-free for Massachusetts. It cost me about $1 million more to build a chicken house in Connecticut than it does in Pennsylvania or Ohio. So it's all the costs are higher.
Thank you. And it was just a little educational kind of preview for maybe someone listening or here or someone like myself who didn't know what goes into, building the cost of a dozen eggs. I had no idea that some of those items were so much higher here, and it kind of puts it into perspective. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Senator Martin.
I'm just curious, how big's the chicken house?
Square feet? A couple 100,000 chickens in a building. Square feet, they're about 400,000 square feet.
Thank you.
As an aside, have you been affected by what's caused the price of?
Bird flu? Yeah,
Of
I thought that
eggs.
topic might come up. Yeah, actually, Hillendale Farms, we have about 20 million chickens in our company, and our largest farm in Ohio was infected with bird flu last Labor Day in September. So we lost 4 million chickens to the bird flu, and we're just now getting back to about 50% production at that farm. So it takes you about a year and a half to get back to normal after you depop and disinfect and everything. So that's a big reason for our volume was affected, our pricing was affected. We buy a lot of eggs on the open market so we can supply our customers. And when we buy eggs on the open market, we're paying $6, $7, $8 a dozen also for eggs on the open market. And we're a deficit supplier of eggs. So we buy a lot of eggs ourselves.
What was the last thing you said?
We buy a lot of eggs ourselves.
And I'm not in any way indicating that there's a problem with this, but for your facility here in Connecticut, you benefited from the price going up, right?
It helped. We also lost money the last 5 years before this. So I've been up here since 2015, pretty much from 15 to 21. We lost money on most of the dozens of eggs we produced. So
Because
it's
of the market
supply and
price.
demand. It's commodity, and our costs are higher than what we'd get for a dozen eggs. So
How do you stay in business if your costs are higher than what you get?
we have a lot of those conversations. It's challenging.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Doesn't appear so.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Blair.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Hear you, sir.
Okay, thanks for allowing me to speak on this. I support eliminating the highway use tax. I run a business in Connecticut, and we rely on our suppliers to keep stocked up. With how sharply inflation has risen and rising costs continuing, such as labor, fuel, and electric, spoken about by so many others here, it makes me worry when we endure yet another layer of inflation that, simply put, makes it harder and harder to do business in the state. We are a business that stayed open during the pandemic, and our work was essential. We made it through. But now, looking at a monthly P&L makes me wonder if continued price increases will drive customers elsewhere. The struggle truly is real. I support this bill and respectfully ask you to think of people like me when you make this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony today. Seeing no question. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much. And can you please talk about if you have a business that's directly affected, or you are a consumer who feels that this will have an impact, if you could, please?
Well, I have a business that's directly affected, and on the retail end. So obviously, just like everyone else, this cost is passed down to the consumer.
Okay, so it's a trunking business, or you're dealing, the price of goods that you sell?
No, ma'am, it's a food service.
Food service. All right, thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions. Thank you, sir. Tim, David Armando. David Armando. Jeff Bausch.
Good afternoon, committee members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Jeff Bausch. I'm the Director of Inbound Logistics and Transportation at Bozzuto's. You may know Bozzuto's is a leading wholesale distributor of food and household products to retailers in New England, New York, New Jersey. And we're based here in Cheshire, Connecticut. We're one of the largest privately owned companies, and we employ over 1,000 people. I'd like to submit testimony on behalf of Bozzuto's in opposition of the recent implementation of the highway use tax. As a wholesale distributor of food and household products, this will add additional operating costs and serve to create a significant disadvantage to our organization compared to our wholesale distributors who don't reside within the state of Connecticut. This tax will ultimately be passed on to retailers and ultimately to your constituents with no regard to political affiliation or income status. Connecticut has a strong distribution presence with many distribution companies that your constituents work at and shop at. In addition to Bozzuto's, there's, Stop and Shop, BJ's, Aldi's, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, et cetera, all within the state of Connecticut that I'm sure you shop at or your constituents shop at. This tax has the potential to impact future growth and investments and future jobs for companies that are required to absorb the long-term and burdensome costs. And that our folks who are already laden with a 9.9% increase in food prices in 2022, an anticipated additional increase of 7.1% in 2023, according to the Economic Research Service. Heard a lot of good things from our other speakers. As far as costs go, I'll probably answer that now. It's to be determined. We haven't determined it. It's kind of crazy that we're running a business that we haven't yet been able to determine this total cost for a couple of reasons. One is, the administrative costs is burdensome. We have thousands of hours of IT costs and accounting costs that are going into an organization as large as Bozzuto's. And then, to comment a little bit on the pass-throughs, we're a distributor, so everything that is in our facilities comes in with other carriers as well. So we continue to get calls every day of companies that have learned of this tax, and we're fielding those calls as to how they're going to pass those costs on to us. So This tax burden just adds to the already strong headwinds in transportation, which is fuel, IFTA, emissions costs, and certainly the skyrocketing equipment costs. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Representative Piscopo has a question for you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your testimony. You brought up something interesting. We always talk about the pass through to the final consumer. Our costs when we go to the grocery store, our IGA is going to go up. But also the pass through from the trucks that deliver to you have to be figured in. So when figuring out your total cost for this first quarter of this tax, it'd be useful to maybe get a handle on that also, figured in with that cost also. If you could provide something like that, I don't know, can you?
I can at this time. It's ongoing. We obviously are still trying to figure out the burdensome way that the tax structure was legislated, number one, and number two, again, as we continue to we don't have the total cost because not everyone has passed it on yet, and some of it's going retro to the first of the year as they've figured it out and try to administratively pass it on to us. So unfortunately, I don't have a number yet, which is kind of crazy.
Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Learned a lot here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Representative Zupkis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I was out, so I missed your testimony, but thank you for coming. And I'm sure you talked about how big your company is in Cheshire and how this affects you. Did you give a dollar amount of how much this would cost Bozzuto's?
I did not. That was kind of the point, is we have not quite figured that out yet. We just did the first month or 2 months. And again, the administrative costs of administering this. And then, don't forget, that's really only half the cost. Half the cost is the burdensome that we're going to pay to the state of Connecticut. But the other part is all of our inbound products that are coming into the warehouse where they're passing that on to us.
Thank you. I've actually spoken to quite a few people at Bozzuto's about this, and the number that they kind of just threw out there was going to be close to $1 million. And so my other question to you is Bozzuto's going to just absorb these costs, or are they going to pass them on?
Well, of course, that's a customer by customer basis, but obviously, it, as in any business, it's probably a little bit of both.
I would agree with you. I don't see how any company can absorb that. So I know that y'all supply even stores in Prospect, all the IGAs and all. So I can already see all of these prices going up, but I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate what you do for the community. You are a huge organization and employ tons and tons of people. And I know that you are courted all the time to go to other states where it's not so burdensome on you. But I do appreciate you coming today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. And I know we've been talking a lot, particularly with the smaller companies, about the administrative burden. But I think you mentioned that even in a larger company with, an IT department and people to track this, what are you seeing in terms of that additional administrative burden for implementing this tax and paying it?
Well, and again, I've been involved in a lot of the meetings, but it's been thousands of hours of IT and accounting. So again, we don't have a final number, but it's been thousands of hours of trying to mitigate this. Many people have talked about just paying the total cost, but again, when it's based upon weight, just think how crazy that is. We go out with multiple stops and unload at each stop. So how much weight's in the trailer, Representative? And how much tax do we pay on that particular run?
So how are you figuring that out? Are you just taking an average? Are you taking the weight at the beginning and assuming that's the weight on the whole thing? Because again, this does seem incredibly complex if you're making numerous stops and unloading at each one, yet a differential amount is payable on the next segment of the trip.
Yeah, that's exactly what our IT department is working on. And like I said, I don't know how many thousands of hours they have into this, but it's pretty massive to try to figure this out.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no one else? Sure. Christopher Checketts. Is Christopher available? Seeing not. David Palumbo. He's there earlier. Heather Percope. Is Heather Percope? Seeing not. Has anyone signed up to testify that was called earlier but was not available? Either here in the room or remotely? Going once? Well, seeing not, then we are finished with our assigned duties for the day. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the game if that's your interest. And we will see you again soon. Thank you, Madam Chair. We are adjourned.